We're going to start off with a background. That's a snapshot of where you are right now as a church. Then we're going to move into what we call norms. For those of you who like numbers, which is not myself, really, that's what we're looking at statistically across the country. How does your church compare in certain areas to other churches around the country? And then we're going to talk about assets, the things that we want to protect, challenges or barriers. You know, some people were a little nervous in listening sessions, like were you called in because something was wrong? Oftentimes we're called in because something is right, and we want to make sure that we keep the same healthy trajectory and make sure the systems are in place to support that. So you'll hear those assets, you'll hear the challenges, and then we're going to go through a list of recommendations, and then we'll open it up to questions. I'm going to hand it over to Mark.
Thanks, Carrie Ann. I won't move it if you can hear me. If you hear me, then we'll just keep it where it is. But I also want to offer a welcome. It's good to see you all today. And my hat's off to everyone in this room, because I know we're competing against football today. I come from a similar setting, a lot of sports fans, so thank you for coming out. So I want to start with the background and give you a snapshot of your church. I think often, and what I'm going to share with you, you probably know, but it often helps to hear an outsider share what they see. So State College Presbyterian Church is a warm and diverse community. Hospitality is at the heart of who you are. Yesterday and Friday's listening sessions, we heard people talk about how this community of faith is welcoming, accepting, and energized. I think that's really important to recognize. You all have a long history that dates back to 1890. It's a rich history. In the last 25 years, late 90s and early 2000s was a vibrant time here. A lot of exciting things were happening. People remember some of the highlights of that era. And then over the past 20 years, there have been some difficult things, some significant challenges, as well as significant decline. Today, that has left the membership at 616, with about 165 people attending Sunday worship in person. Now, many members know what the mission is here at the church, that it's centered on being a welcoming community. But many people couldn't quote the mission statement. That was interesting to us, but they could express the sentiment behind the mission statement. That this is a place of radical hospitality that should be offered to all people. And you live that out through some significant events that happen throughout the year. Things like the Palm Sunday breakfast, the candlelight service, and the Christmas Day dinner. And you carry out your ministry too with an important structure. You are led by the session, the deacons, and of course the staff, along with 26 committees. We learned a little bit about the committees over this weekend. You have both a ministerial staff and a program staff to carry out this work. And to carry out the work, your current budget is $989,131. That's the same as last year. And if you look at the last 10 years, a period in which you've had a marked decrease in membership, the budget has remained for the most part stable, which I applaud you for. That's a significant thing. Now, you all have navigated a number of challenges, and one of your challenges too is the building itself, right? We as visitors have found it a challenge to walk through the building and get out. But it's a benefit that this building's paid for too. We know too that parking is a challenge here. I counted 20 parking spots outside, but then there are the parking decks nearby. You all offer a wide range of ministries. There are many programs for all ages, everything from Logos, Pathways, Oasis. There are college ministries, young adult ministries, and yesterday morning we met a couple ladies outside who were doing a walk and a devotion together. So it's really fascinating for us to see all the programs and events that are going on through the church. And there are even opportunities for people to get involved with the music ministry and many other capacities. Ministry Architects was invited in to provide an assessment, and that's what we are doing today. And over this weekend, as Carrie Ann mentioned, we met with 8 focus groups. It totaled 86 people, 70 people in the groups and 16 through surveys. Just a great turnout there. Maybe you're like me and know that church people have a lot of opinions, right? I've never met a church person who does not have an opinion. Now, sometimes opinions are kept to ourselves, some are spoken, some are positive, some are negative. But even the simplest opinion is sometimes based on a single conversation or a single event. And those opinions can affect a church's reputation among themselves and out in the community. And Ministry Architects is aware of that, and we've created we call it an invisible checklist of 3 items. These items by themselves don't necessarily mean that you have or don't have an effective or faithful ministry, but they're really informative. If these 3 items are checked, it shows that you're building a climate, an atmosphere for growth, innovation, even experimentation. If you fail to check these boxes, there can be second guessing, there can even be discouragement within the congregation. So let me share what these 3 boxes are. The first is the numbers box. This has to do with a significant number of parishioners participating in the programs of the church, in the life of the church. And we know that without having a critical mass in the programs, ministries can struggle. And they can even be viewed as weak. Churches are often judged by their numbers too. Now, we looked at your numbers and we've partially checked this box. And let me explain why. We've seen that many church members are highly invested in this church, and they're participating in a number of programs. And we see people attending Bible studies, serving on session or as deacons, helping with committees. So there's a great deal of engagement by the membership. But over the course of this weekend, we also heard a number of people, a lot of people in fact, talk about the youth ministry. They remembered the day when there were 100 people in Fish, and there was a desire to have higher numbers again in youth ministry. And so for that reason, we have only partially checked this box because of that desire for higher numbers or more people in the youth ministry. The second item on our invisible checklist is programs. Now, church providing visible, effective programming is something that we look at. When you have lots of programs, it gives people something to talk about. You can feel good as a church to offer a number of different programs and ministries. We have checked this box because there is no shortage of programs, Bible studies, and events here at State College Presbyterian. In fact, people over the weekend told us that this is a busy place because there's so much going on. The third item on our checklist is enthusiasm. This has to do with a sense of joy in the church family. Also, a positive attitude among staff, volunteers, and the membership as a whole. And we've noticed that there's increased worship attendance, there's growing engagement in small groups, and renewed energy around college ministry. And all of that points to there being a lot of enthusiasm, and that's why we've checked this box. Want to also say that a church needs to constantly work on keeping these boxes checked as a way of maintaining health and developing really a long-range vision and putting that vision into action. I want to turn now to what we call norms. These are 7 rules of thumb. They're not necessarily targets, but they will show you what's happening in your average church. The first one is budget. We do like to look at our numbers. Ministry Architects has found that with the average church budget, churches are spending $2,500 per attender. Now, your budget tells us that you have the capacity to minister and serve to 396 attenders. You have 165 in worship. And that also tells us that you all are sharing or being very generous in supporting that budget. Again, my hat's off to you for that. Another norm that we look at is staffing. The rule of thumb here is that one full-time staff member, and this is someone who works 40 hours a week, for every 40 people. Now, with 165 average worship attenders, State College Presbyterian can equate to this to having 8 full-time employees, FTEs as we call them. And that's one full-time person for every 21 people in the church. Now, you have the capacity to actually sustain 320 worship attenders. So that's another interesting thing to be aware of. Now, you support your staff through your payroll, and I want to look at that for a second. The typical church is spending about 60% of its budget on payroll. This is higher than it's been up to 2020, up to the COVID pandemic. Churches were spending 45 to 55%. But now on average, it's 60% of the budget to pay for church staff. State College Pres is spending 68% of its budget on personnel, and that's slightly higher than the norms that we're seeing. We also know that facilities matter. They matter because they impact what people experience. And there are 2 elements to facilities that we at Ministry Architects pay attention to, and that's parking and seating. Both of those are constraints. There are only so many parking spaces available and only so many seats available in your worship space. Now, parking, I mentioned how many spots I counted in the parking lot, but plus what's available in the parking decks, we have the number of 325 or a little bit more spaces available. That number means your capacity for worship is 540. Now, when you look at seating, you get some different numbers. Churches on average stop growing when they reach 80% capacity in their worship space, in their sanctuary. And so in your space, you have 400 seats. That means your capacity is 320 for a single service. And that also means that you have room for growth right now with your single service. You have space to add another 155 worship attenders. In worship, we also see visitors, right? And that's another norm that we pay attention, and visitor retention in particular. Now, on average, 10 to 30% of first-time visitors will return and then become regular attenders. So if you want to grow your church, if you want to grow 10 to 30 people in a year, then you're going to need to have at least 100 first-time visitors. In the past year, you all have had 85 visitors, and that means you could see as many as 9 to 26 people return and become a regular part of your church life. Volunteers is another group that we pay attention to. On average, 45% of your average worship attenders get involved in regular service. You have 60 regular volunteers at State College, and with 165 people in worship, that equates to 36% of people being involved as volunteers. And that's a little below average. And then the final item that we look at in terms of norms is group involvement. They're on average 40 to 50% of adult worship attenders get involved in groups. Strong churches have as much as 80% of their worship attenders involved in groups. You all have 91% involved in groups, and that's above average. That's a really good sign. So those are the norms. Now we're going to switch and talk about building a sustainable staff, having a sustainable model of ministry. We know that instability often comes about when ministry is built around one single person. And you can probably think of churches that have a very strong personality leading the way. And when that person leaves the congregation, the ministries often fall apart. At Ministry Architects, we believe and we're following a stable approach to ministry. And that comes about by building a team with 3 types of staff and volunteers. These 3 types are, first, the architect. It is a person, it could also be a group, who designs the plans, has the vision, and then sees it through. They always keep the big picture in view. Second are the skilled workers. Think of these as the people who have specific gifts and talents. They hold certain responsibilities. This can relate to age group ministries, could relate to a type of music or a mission, or even a specific program. But these skilled workers carry out the work. And third is the general contractor. This person or group manages the flow of the work. They're the one who follows the plan that has come from the architect. At State College, we see the architect as a combination of Pastor Scott and the session working together on the vision. Volunteers are the skilled workers, and there are quite a few. And we also know that the church is moving toward a more member-led and staff-supported model for ministry. And I think it's just important to acknowledge that as a part of this sustainable model for ministry. Now, as you think about sustainable ministry, a good place to start are with naming your strengths, your assets. These are things that you want to protect as you move towards the future. And we've come up with a list of assets that I want to share with you. First, and this is the first one you'll want to protect, is we've described as a resilient spirit. As I mentioned earlier, you've faced a number of challenges in the last decade. There are a lot of hard things. There have been a decline in membership, there have been rifts in the congregation, but the church has a determination to flourish and thrive with its ministry. We heard one person say, people who stayed were committed. And there really is a genuine love and appreciation for this community. A second asset is the right person for the job. And what we mean by that is that Pastor Scott is a really good fit for this congregation. His leadership in a very short time has been fruitful. He's bringing new life to this church. There's a sense of purpose. People are really appreciative of what he's doing. And I heard one person say, now I'll quote for you, "We are going in the right direction." And it's good to have a leader like that there are such strong, affirming feelings toward. A third asset we've labeled as things under control. There has been a period in which things felt unsettled. There were staff changes and membership fluctuations, but now there's a renewed enthusiasm. There's a commitment to pastors' leadership. There's optimism about the future, and there's just so much excitement for what's going to happen. And people have said things like, it feels stable now, and it feels exciting. So that there's so much energy with where the church is at this moment. And I think that connects really closely to this next asset, and it is that this is an invested congregation. What we're seeing is many people making significant commitments to the church. That was visible this weekend with 52% of your average worship attenders participated in either a listening session or filled out a survey. A high engagement in this process. We even had one person who attends worship online, that person's only engagement with the church is online, came out over the weekend to participate in person. That says a lot. Another asset is the family atmosphere that's found here at State College. It's a welcoming place. It offers hospitality to people. It's a comfortable place. And there are many generations, just like what you would find in a family, from newborns to a 104-year-old in the church. Someone told us that person still stands up to sing and worship. That's amazing. But it is a supportive atmosphere around here, and it's supportive of all ages, helping one another grow together in faith. One person says, the church feels like family. And we heard multiple times that State College Pres is a second home, or it's a home away from home. People here feel valued, they feel accepted, they feel like family. And that's a really important thing to build around. Another asset is location. We know in real estate, location, it matters. You all have a prime location. It's strategically located right here in the heart of the city. You're, was it a block away from Penn State? That gives you this grand opportunity to serve the university, to serve this community. And this is a happening location. Carrie Ann and I have walked to a couple different restaurants over the days we've been here. And each day we saw all kinds of people. Yesterday when we were walking back to the church, we noticed a little outdoor fair or market. People had tents and tables set up. I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of people would just walk right by the church every day, but you get a lot of foot traffic. People walk right by your building every single day, and that means you have great visibility. It means you have some grand potential for lots of outreach. So your location is a strength. A seventh asset that we've described is you have a heart for the campus. You all know that this church was founded with the mission to serve the students of Penn State. One person in the listening session said, "We were founded to minister to the campus, and that has not changed." The ministry has changed over 135 years, but that commitment to the university has not. It is a cornerstone of this church. It's a cornerstone of your identity. And there is a great desire to make an impact on students and on the university. One person said, community impact, not just centered within these walls, but the campus community is what matters. And in just the last year and a half, there's been an influx of students. Last year, 4 freshman young ladies started attending, and that has also energized the church. We've noticed too that as a strength, the creativity of this church. There's a willingness and a desire to experiment, to innovate. It's even evident in the language that you use to describe your different groups. You have a variety of different names, but it shows a creative spirit within your church family. And the final one that I'll point out as a strength is the preschool, the Stay and Play preschool. It is one of the, I think, the most widely recognized element of this church in the community. That's what you all told us in the listening sessions. More than anything else, this church seems to be known for its preschool. It's a vital program. It forges relationships with people in the community, and it creates some fantastic opportunities for outreach and for further connections with your church. And one person said, "I dream of the church being a place for families where it is fun, exciting place to be, where Stay and Play families feel part enough to want to try to come to our service." So those are the assets that we have identified for you all. And I'm going to turn it over now to Carrie Ann.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so if those are the assets, now we get to talk about what could possibly be a barrier or a challenge. So before I step into those, I thought I'd show you this picture. So this is a church that's up on stilts, and it's a real picture. Ministry is still happening all the time inside this church. At the same time, a lot of work is being done. So we're going to talk about some things that could get in the way and be a barrier, or maybe it's just a system that needs to be built to support what the church is already doing. And Mark and I get to work with you all and think about it kind of like this. I'm from very close to Orlando, Disney World. There's signs all the time when a ride goes down or they're working on it, and it says, being refurbished for your future enjoyment. We're not saying that. We're saying the work is going to be done and the ministry is still happening. And hopefully, as the work is being done over the next 18 months, you'll be able to notice those changes as they happen. These are not necessarily all bad things. These are more things that we just want to make sure that the structure is in place as you all continue on this really positive trajectory that we heard from all of you over the last 3 days. So I'm going to start off with Glory Days. We heard many of you point to the good old days. And on one hand, that's such a beautiful story that this church has a deep history and tradition, that we don't want to lose the tradition, and we don't want to forget the history, but we also don't want to get caught in the past. We heard people say things like, it feels like people are trying to hold on to the past, and the past, it is gone. Someone else said, we are stuck in what we used to be, and we may not go back to what it used to be. So this sentiment can make it difficult for a church who is working so hard to move into the future. This challenge is keenly felt in reference to FISH, the youth ministry. Many participants, typically we won't say many. Typically we want to give a very specific number, but this quote actually was said word for word in almost every listening session, which was, I remember when FISH had 100 kids. And we did a little research, and it seems like that would have been almost 20 years ago. Right? So realizing the reality of that. And so I did a little digging. This is not a youth ministry assessment, but I thought maybe this number will help as we think about the future. So in a typical church, the size of the student ministry tends to settle at about 10% of whatever the adult participation in worship is on Sunday morning. So if we have 165 people on a Sunday, we would expect to see 16 and a half students in our ministry, right? So that's a more realistic expectation of what you might see in the ministry. And that's sustainable, right? Because if you had 100 students come in right now, you will not have enough adults to care for them. So right now, you have enough adults in this church to care for the students who are coming in and then continue the growth of that ministry. The next one is confusing committees. I was a little bit confused, but I was encouraged because many of you were confused as well. And the feedback that I heard from many were things like, there are a lot of committees doing lots of things, but I'm not sure who does what. I think there are 26 committees with overlap. I am not sure which committee does what again. And then this one, one participant said, you don't know what you don't know. And what that reference was too, was in a particular listening session, one person asked a question of, does the church do fill in the blank? And somebody across the room said, yeah, I'm on that committee. And everyone else in the room said, why didn't we know that we had a committee that did that? So it's just a little confusing with the 26 committees as to who does what and how can we care for the congregation in the best way that we can. The next is missing volunteer systems. You all have an amazing group of people who are serving in multiple different areas, but we heard from your participants in listening sessions that they felt like the same people were doing all of the work. The same people who will say yes are the ones that will probably go back and ask to do something else. But at the same time, we heard, I'm not exactly sure what's available for me to do. So people were asking the question, how do I know what there is that I can do in the church? But also that there's a missing system of people actually actively recruiting people into positions. Some of that is due to what we had talked about briefly about staffing. You know, following COVID, churches built up their staffs, and we have kept in that reality and kind of leaned away from inviting the church into the opportunities to serve. Family ministry gap. So you all have this beautiful congregation that coming in with fresh eyes and not being able to be here every Sunday, for me to be able to sit in Reverend Hoffman's office and listen as what it sounded like horses running over the ceiling. And I had to ask him, I said, what was that? And he jokingly said it's the ministry of horses, but you all have children and you have somebody who's 104. You are not in a situation where it's an entirely aging congregation. You have some real opportunity. But a few listening participants pointed out that they were not really sure on the continuity of care from children to middle school to high school. What happens when high schoolers go off to college? Where do their parents go? It was actually pointed to that sometimes there's this drop off. Like, families are a part of the church, their kids go off to college, and then the parents kind of disappear because they were attending as a family. There was also mention of something called Polo, which no one said, hey, let's bring this back. But what they did say was, what do we have for young families specifically? So I will say, you have this beautiful opportunity for intergenerational community and relationship, but there may need to be something that is specific for young families as they're coming in, and that's where that gap is. A lack of unified vision is, we had a few people who said things like, the church is vibrant, it's transitioning, and it's changing, which are all really positive phrases. Yet at the same time, this transition has also created this challenge around the collective identity of who the church is today. So when we look back to who we were 20 years ago, it may be time to go through a process of figuring out exactly who are we today and where do we want to go. So this challenge can be seen in a tendency to look to that past. One person actually said, we need to stop saying we used to. And instead start looking forward to saying, where are we going to go next? Okay, strategic staffing. You all have a wonderful staff. There have been transitions, there have been changes. Participants in listening sessions pointed out that, well, we had this one person that did administrative tasks and we knew who to go to, and now we're not really sure who to go to. It just feels a little fuzzy. That comes with transitions as people come in and people go out. One participant mentioned that the staff need to understand clearly what they are in charge of, and the congregation needs to know who does what. And this lack of clarity can lead to some confusion. It can also lead to some inefficiency. The issue of unclear roles is a tangible challenge. One person shared that between not being really sure about the committees and not knowing who to go to on staff, that sometimes they just feel stuck. The roles and the responsibilities can feel unclear. The next is a communication breakdown, which this one for me has a little irony because you all have some really great communication systems in this church, and I don't get to say that often. I think almost every church that we talk to, there is a clear lack of communication systems. You actually have some communication systems, but what they need is a little bit more structure so that people know where to go for different information that they need to find. And it'll go back again to that you don't know what you don't know. In one of our listening sessions, someone called out a group that they're involved in online, and I raised my hand and said, if I'm new to your church, how do I find that group? And everyone in the listening session said, I don't know. And then somebody said, go to the website. So I did, but it's not on the website. So you have some groups that if you've been here for a while, you'll know how to find it. But kind of like the 3 doors that Mark and I came in this morning before we found the right one. The same thing for if you really want to be a part of a group, you're going to need a tour guide to find it. So that's where some of that communication breakdown comes. You have some great systems. Now we just want to make sure that you have structure so that when new people come in, they don't feel like they need a tour guide. They can find their way around on their own. Okay, a marketing myth. So Mark pointed to the fact that location, location, location. We walked around the whole block and I just kept commenting on, look at all these young families, look at these college students, there's so many people. But we're not sure that everyone knows who you are and what you offer. So this could be, some people mentioned, this was not our recommendation. Your people said, we need to work on social media. We would love to have more of a presence there. That could be good. Somebody else said, we don't have enough signage on Beaver Ave. And we need to make the church look like we are here and we are a living, breathing church. So that's kind of that communication is that internal, and then the marketing is how do we look to the community around us. Conflicting opportunities. This one might be one of my favorites. So Mark pointed to the fact that 91% of this congregation are involved in some sort of a small group, yet in multiple groups, people said, I went to a small group and only 2 people were there. So there's this lack of critical mass when you show up. We think the reason why is so many opportunities are being offered and there's an overlap. So we heard in listening sessions, especially on Sunday morning. So we have coffee hour, but we have adult education. So we have to decide, do we want to grow or do we want to grow in relationship with others? So there's a little bit of a conflict. We also heard that with some of the children's programming and youth programming during the week. So, we do different things on different nights, but we had multiple parents share things like, we're involved in a small group, so that's going to happen on Monday night. On Tuesday night, the kids are going to go here. On Wednesday night, they're going to go here. On Thursday night, we have this. And before we know it, every night of the week has been taken up by something in the church. So it's a busy, busy congregation. You are all very, very involved. But if you're looking for like a critical mass in a Bible study, you might not find it because there's so many different opportunities. And then the missing feedback loop. There is this great desire in this church for 2 groups of people specifically that we heard. Those young families and those college students. The missing feedback loop is that we may try to create things for families, or we may try to create things for a college student, but the greatest thing that the church can do is ask. What's going to be the best thing that we can do for parents? What's going to be the best night of the week for a specific event? The same thing for college students. We heard in one group that the college group was meeting and there was choir at the same time. And the college students wanted to be a part of both, but again, what did they have to do? They got to make a decision, right? They have to choose between them. So that would be part of that missing feedback. Let's move on to, these are the recommendations that we are making for the next 3 to 5 months. These are just recommendations, so you can choose to say these are great or maybe not. But let's take a look. Each one of these recommendations supports one of the challenges that I just mentioned. So the first one is that we reframe the next 18 months. So this is through November of 2026. And this is just thinking that over the next 18 months, kind of like that church on stilts, that there's going to be some work going on in the background. If you're a part of it, you'll experience it, and the rest, if you're not a part of it, hopefully you're going to hear about it from the other people who are part of the work that's being done. We ask that you establish a prayer team, that everything that we do together is going to be undergirded with prayer. Then we're going to ask that this report is given to session and that we request approval before we move forward on any of these recommendations. Then that a strategic implementation team is recruited, which I believe is almost done. So this is a team that will be working with Mark and myself to address some of these challenges, these barriers to this wonderful trajectory that you're on, and they'll be working through these recommendations. Partner with us. Thank you for inviting us. Here are some of our recommendations. So we talked about strategic staffing. There is a strategic staffing recommendation. We're going to recommend that we kind of take a look at an organizational chart, which not just staff, but let's take a look at those 26 committees and see where does everything fit in? Where is there an overlap? Where are more than one person doing the same job? Or even is there an overlap in any of those committees? Then we're going to quickly get to work on volunteer recruiting. And then there'll be, it is up here, okay, the Vision Summit. So we would schedule that Vision Summit in February or March would be the best time for us to go ahead and do that because it's, I understand, after football season, but before we move too much into Lent and graduation and all of those fun things. Then that we create a communication and a marketing plan. So take all those wonderful streams of communication that you already have and make sure that we have a really clear structure for what's the purpose behind this communication, who's it trying to reach? Is it to reach parents? Is it to reach college students? The marketing plan will be looking outside of the church. Do we have clear signage? And part of that will even take into consideration new people coming into the church. So if people come in the front door of the church, how does the signage look? If you come in the wrong door, do you know which way to go? And actually, I laughed about that, but can I say that the little, and I'm not sure what you call it, but the little portico area that is when we figured out the right door, the signage in that area is actually fantastic because I had a question about name tags. And going through the list, so again, I'm putting on my, I just came to this church. When I saw the name tags, I thought, oh, those must be staff. I was like, that's an awful lot of staff. And then I thought, oh, maybe they're on session. And then somebody said, no, we all have name tags. And I thought, gosh, if I went on Sunday morning, would I feel left out if I didn't have a name tag? And I walked into the portico and I saw that sign and went, no, it's explained right here. So you have some really great processes in place. We just want to make sure that we're coordinating them and that nothing's falling through the cracks. Calendar evaluation, that'll go to that conflicting opportunities. So looking at the different things that are happening in the life of the church, are there too many opportunities that are calling on the same people, causing people to make a choice? Do I do something for my spiritual growth? Do I join the choir? Do I go to fellowship hour? Do I go to adult education? So we're going to look at some of those things and just ask the question, what is the purpose behind each one of those? And then the committee alignment is just looking at those 26 committees, and it may be as simple as making sure that somewhere in the church, those are laid out and outlined to what they do and who you would need to go to. And then creating a family ministry plan is looking at from the time a child is born into the church, how do they transition through each area of ministry? I love that Reverend Hoffman said this to me this morning, and he didn't know that this was in my presentation. Which, did you know that? No. He just happened to say that. So how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So that's why we break these recommendations up into, here's what we want to do right now. This is what we see as being most important. And then we have other items that we say, these are important. They're just not as important as these, so they go on what we'll do on the next list. And it'll be a month-by-month plan where Mark and I will be working with that implementation team. I know that was a lot. I would love to hear if you have any questions for Mark, for myself, or thoughts you would like to share.
I didn't hear anything about those of us who are older. I've been listening to the whole presentation, and it's a little disconcerting.
Yes.
We met at the village, 20 people at the village. Mm-hmm. And my question is how can they be seen?
So So there are other recommendations in here, such as a contact plan and an MIA, meaning we haven't heard from somebody and where are they plan. They are not all listed up here because we only have an hour and this is a 24-page report. But that is why the contact plan is being included, to make sure that no one of any generation is falling through the cracks. And also, that family ministry gap plan is the way that it's written in the report says from birth on, making sure that there is this transition and connection through each of the generations. So we'll be coming back for this Vision Summit, which is another opportunity for people to come together and give input that's going to build out a mission statement, the values for the church, as well as 3-year goals with 1-year benchmarks. This is a beginning spot. This is where you are here. We're starting here, but over the course of the next weeks and months, other things will be developed as well, such as what comes out in those goals and values.
Hey there, thank you for your presentation. This was very interesting. When we talk about numbers in the first half of the presentation, and especially with regard to the budget, we've had lots of conversations about how to compare ourselves to other congregations. And one of the unique things we think is unique about us is that we've paid off our mortgage. Mm-hmm. And so can we compare ourselves to a group of churches that have massive mortgage payments to make every month? Do you have a sense in your work with churches, are we an anomaly in that? Or are when we compare ourselves to other churches' budgets, are other churches also in that same boat?
So does the budget number change if it's a church who has no debt because the building is paid for, was the question. And the answer is no, it doesn't change, because this budget is active ministry budget and staff salary. So that's the two things that we're looking at for this.
Would you talk a little bit about what you will be looking at when you address the conflicting circumstances, such as you said the person wanted to be in Bible study, yet they had the choir, right? Because there are a lot of extenuating circumstances inside and outside the church. So talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so we will not be coming in and making any changes. We'll be working with people inside of your church to map out what are all of your opportunities, and then start asking the question of what is the purpose behind each of them and the timing of them. And from there, they'll create a game plan for what's the right next step.
One of the things that your study has developed is that we have unused capacity. And I know that there is a very strong desire within the church to grow. To grow in terms of, we would love to see more college students participating. We would love to have more people become members of the church. My struggle with that is, how do I make that happen? Do I change my philosophy as a church? Do I change my teachings as a church? What I'm offering as a church to make it more attractive to people who want that instead of what we currently have? Or do we say, this is who we are, and you need to judge whether that works for you?
Well, that's a really big question. I'll start here, and I'm gonna pinpoint the college ministry part of the question, because like I mentioned over here, there are other items that don't get put up on a slide because we only have 1 hour. So there is a college ministry plan in here. So sometimes, well, actually all the time, if you don't have a target, you'll miss it every time. So we want to, specifically for a college student, create a target. So how do we invite a college student? What are we inviting them into? How are we connecting them? We will work with the implementation team to create a game plan. First, we map out what's already happening. We're doing an Adopt a College student program. We have 5 college students who are coming in right now. How do we create a feedback survey to give them? 3 questions. What would you like to see from the church? So not necessarily that asking the church to make some changes, but creating an actual plan for when a college student walks in the doors of State College Presbyterian, we can expect that these are the steps that are going to be taken. And the final step in this recommendation is that we get them into leadership. Do they become a deacon? Do they get on a committee? Where do they go? But they get into some sort of leadership in the church. Part of the volunteer process that we're going to get to work with you all on is a tool called the Volunteer Accelerator. And I heard people talk about maybe taking like a talent assessment a few years back. Okay, so the Volunteer Accelerator is a tool that we are going to custom create for your church. So the volunteer positions that are available are going to be put into this tool. And then you'll be able to take a survey and it will tell you what are the top 10 areas of the church that would be best for you to serve. So it's kind of like that talent assessment that you spoke about, but it's very specific to State College Presbyterian. Thank you all. You have been so, all the things that we heard when we asked, give us one word to describe your church: warm, welcoming, loving. We experienced all of that. So thank you so much for inviting us in, letting us kind of like look behind the curtain and ask questions. I know that some of you were concerned that this might be a long report that ended up behind a piano somewhere collecting dust. I hope now you hear that there's a strategic plan over the next 18 months that we'll get to walk with you all on. So thank you.
Thank you.
And this is a huge first step in that process. The implementation team will work with them over the next 18 months to help us figure out who we want to be. Not to tell us who we are or who we want to be, but to help us figure that out and discern our call as Christians in and from this special place. So I'm looking forward to that. I hope you are too. Good news, if you don't have to try to remember all of this, 2 things. We are recording. It may not be the best recording, but we'll have a recording of this presentation. We also have a report that they have written up. And I have copies of that here today. We didn't want you to be so busy looking at that you weren't listening to them. So be sure to get one of those if you'd like on your way out. I have 25 or so we can at least try to do 1 per household to start with, and if we have extras, we can always print more, and we can also send that out as well. But that'll let you dig in a little bit more to what they've shared with us today.